All right, and welcome everybody. Thank you for joining us again for this episode of Triggered and True with myself, Brian Friese, and Laura Duncan. And today we're going to be talking about something that I look at as the X factor when it comes to emotional health, and that is compassion. We're going to start off by talking about what compassion is and isn't. And Laura feels that it would be probably best for us to start off with what compassion isn't. So why don't we start there, Laura, and you can talk to us about what compassion is not, and maybe deal with some of our misconceptions that we have about compassion along the way.
Yeah, that sounds great. So two of the common things that people think that compassion is self-pity or sympathy. And pity and sympathy both are definitely not compassion. And so we'll start with self-pity because that's the more offensive of the two, even though they're both counter to what we're trying to achieve by being able to be compassionate with ourselves and others. So pity or self-pity is of course, we all know feeling sorry for yourself, feeling it's kind of the victim mentality. It's poor me. It's, everything is terrible. And it's this pitying feeling that keeps us stuck and keeps us from being able to move forward in our lives. And one of the things that one of the reasons why pity is so detrimental to our mental and emotional health is the fact that self-pity sees your identity, who you are, for what's been done to you or what you've done. And that actually sees it as who you are. We've talked about shame in the past. Shame says what you do is who you are. Where identity is, I am who I am regardless of what I do. And so if compassion is to be with someone, you really can't be with someone if you see them through the lens of pity, because you're seeing whatever they've gone through as who they are. And even if it's justifiable, even if we've gone through things that people would be able to say is, justifiable, okay to feel bad about, it's still counter to who we are. So no matter what you've gone through or no matter what's been done to you, if we see ourselves or others through pity, we are actually undermining their identity. We're actually coming against who they really are. And then, go ahead.
No, that makes a lot of sense. And one of the things that was coming in my mind when you were saying that is how we label people.
Mm-hmm.
And that probably ties into what you're talking about here.
Mm-hmm, definitely. That's how we see a person for who they are. Just like if somebody's angry, people consider them an angry person. If we look at somebody with pity, that they're a victim, their poor life, the poor things that happened to them, we're not actually being with them. We're being with what happened to them. And we're actually having that be bigger than who they are. And sympathy is another common word that we hear that people think is compassion. And sympathy is feeling sorry for someone. To me, sympathy has a little bit more connection to who you are because you do care about the person. But instead of being with them in their pain, because as humans, we're definitely adverse to pain, I'm going to feel sorry for you, but not with you. And if you think about what empathy is, so sympathy and empathy are very similar. Empathy is being able to feel what somebody else feels because you're willing to feel your own pain. Sympathy is the inability to feel our own pain, which creates the connection of sorry for someone, not sorry with someone. So that doesn't mean that we don't care about somebody when we offer our sympathy or we feel sorry for what happened to them, but it definitely takes away the ability to be with someone because we're not willing to connect to our own pain to be with that person. So pity would be seeing a person counter to who they are based on what's happened to them or what they've done. Sympathy is the inability to connect to our own pain to be with somebody in their pain.
Yeah, I think it's really important that you're differentiating these because some people would say, well, it's just semantics. Compassion, sympathy, those are interchangeable words, but really they're not. And what you're driving home a definite delineation between these different words because they're completely different. So one of the things that I had written down from going to one of your past workshops was, and you kind of said this, but I'm saying it just a little bit different. The big difference between sympathy and compassion is I feel for you is sympathy, and compassion is I feel with you.
Yeah.
And I think that's what one of the things that Jesus modeled so well was he didn't look down at us from above. He came down there and was with us in our pain and in our all the things that we as humans do. He was right in the mix of it with all of us, and he felt with us.
Yeah.
And I think one of the analogies you used was when Jesus cried at the tomb of Lazarus. And well, why don't you just explain how you've shared that in your workshops? I don't want to put too much of my spin on it.
Yeah. No, that's great
Capture
though.
your heart behind it. Yeah.
Yeah. Just the fact that we kind of see, I think our perception of God a lot of times is God is in the sky. He is removed from us. He's a holy God. We are unholy. We are separate from God. That's a lot of people's misconceptions of God. And so Jesus comes, like you said, in human form, and he's with us. But I think it's really amazing that he kind of took it like a step further, because he really was having compassion for those that were grieving Lazarus' death, because Lazarus was still dead, but he was grieving with his sisters and grieving with the family and friends that were weeping over his death. And I think it's so amazing that he was all knowing, all powerful God that knew in 10 minutes he was going to raise him from the dead. So if I was God, I would come in and say, everybody stop crying. I'm going to raise him from the dead. All is well. But I love that he came in and he met them where they were at, which is what compassion is meeting someone where they're at. Even if we quote unquote know better, even if, we know the end, even if we know that it's going to be okay, we're coming in and saying, I'm going to be with you right here, right now. Instead of justifying people's pain or trying to make people's pain feel better, Jesus was actually weeping with them. And I think that's an extraordinary emotional connection that he had with us that definitely points to him being with us versus him being removed from us because he's God.
Yeah, because it's not very logical. It's not very logical for him to have done that, right?
No.
Well, something you said really helped me see the connection with my own children, because oftentimes they'll be very upset about something, and I'll jump right to, well, you shouldn't be upset because this isn't logical, because there isn't really a monster under your bed, or this friend is not really mad at you. They're really just, you misinterpreted or whatever. And boy, talk about an opportunity missed, and just like skipped right over top of compassion there, right? So
definitely.
Yeah. So I think we all do that, or I know I do that a lot. So
Well, especially as adults to children, because we have a more sophisticated brain, and their child brain is still developing. And so they're going to be interpreting their world from a less sophisticated brain. So it's very easy for us as parents or as adults to be superior, because we quote unquote know better. We know everything because our brains are so sophisticated. We really don't, but sometimes that's what it feels like. And I think that that's true both for a parent-child relationship, but I think it's also true for people that may not have as much emotional intelligence, or they may not understand their emotions as well. And I think as all of you are listening to this, you're trying to gain emotional understanding and intelligence. And that's amazing. But also remembering that just because somebody else doesn't understand the same things that you understand, we still want to be compassionate and be with them where they're at, not just give them more information to be able to kind of ultimately medicate what they're feeling, because that's really not being with people.
Well, speaking about being with people, there's a statement you often make, and I heard you say it a lot of times before I even began to grasp what it meant.
Yeah.
And I'm still grasping, but you're gonna help me more and everybody today. But you say self-compassion begins with you and ends in a party. So we've been talking about compassion, and now we're gonna get kind of where the rubber meets the road. We're gonna talk about self-compassion, because this is really where it needs to begin.
Yeah.
So self-compassion begins with you and ends in a party. Can you expound on that?
One of the reasons why I started saying that and sharing it with people is because when I would be working with people one-on-one or in the workshops, people would kind of get offended with the fact that they had to show themselves compassion because their caregivers weren't able to, or they had to show themselves compassion because their spouse wasn't able to, or a friend or a parent or family. And so they would say, well, I don't want to be the one that gives myself compassion. I want other people to give it to me because I'm obviously lacking, and I'm obviously didn't get what I needed. So now you're expecting me to meet my needs, and now I'm going to be all alone. That was everyone's conclusion. If I give myself compassion and I'm with myself, Nobody else is going to be with me, and I'm going to be all alone. And to be all alone feels even more painful than to not have compassion for our pain. And so people are resisting giving self-compassion because of that fact. So what I started to share with people is the fact that self-compassion starts with you, because when you give yourself compassion, it tenderizes your heart. When we're in a triggered moment and we're frantic, we create a barrier that doesn't allow us to connect with God and others. And that barrier causes a that keeps us from being able to be with ourselves in the way that we're talking about.
Basically, what you're getting at is there's a fear of being all alone, and there's pain connected to being all alone, even though in their triggered state, they're pushing people away and don't know it.
Yep.
If they could apply self-compassion, it can bring them, it can comfort the triggered, the pain behind the trigger can comfort it. They can be with themselves, and then they can truly allow other people to come in. Is that in essence what you're saying?
Yes. So I kind of look at like self-compassion, because we are the gatekeeper of our heart. We are the one that allows others to come in, and we're the one that keeps others out. And so when I show myself compassion, and I'm with myself in my pain, and I'm with myself and who I was created to be, and when I'm in that place, my heart will be tender, which opens up the gate for others to come in. We all have people in our lives that want to be with us. And of course, there's people that don't, and there's pain and all those things as well. But my belief is there's more people that want to be with us than not, but we're not able to open up our heart to receive it because it's not coming in the form that we want. And it's not coming. And because we've experienced pain before, we're self-protecting. So when I am with myself and my pain, it creates that ability for others to come be with me. If you've ever, been in a fight or flight mode, let's say you're really angry and someone tries to come up and give you a hug, what's going to happen? You're going to automatically push away or stand there rigidly as they give you a hug, but you're definitely not absorbing that hug. But if you've had compassion on yourself and you're with yourself and you see your pain and you see who you really are, and someone comes to be with you in it, you are able to receive it so much. You're able to absorb it so much deeper.
One of the illustrations you also use is the puppy with the hurt paw.
Mm-hmm.
So how the puppy, if the paw, normally the puppy lets people pet it, they're all great. But if the puppy's hurting, they might nip at the person when they try to pet because they don't know that person's trying to help. They just see everything as pain.
Yeah, and that's exactly how we see it. But if we take care of that paw, we bring compassion to that paw, then our ability to receive that love is so much greater.
Yeah. Well, and I think the other thing that probably a lot of people can relate to is when let's say a loved one, and we've talked about how it's always hardest at home because those people at home are closest to our pain.
Yeah.
And that's something that people shouldn't feel shame about because they think, well, why can I go to work and be so professional? And then I go home and I'm just, a moron sometimes. But it's because the people at home, it's kind of they're closest to your pain and you're closest to them. Mm-hmm. So we've probably all been in that situation where we got triggered, or actually one of our loved ones were triggered and they were operating out of their primal brain. They were not in their right mind, so to speak. And then we got triggered. Mm-hmm. Because they were triggered, and there's a whole lot of yelling and screaming going on or whatever, Mm-hmm. But if we were able to apply compassion to ourselves so that we could stay in our right mind, we're going to be available not only for our own heart, but we're going to be available for our loved one's heart.
Yeah, definitely. And that's why it's bigger. It's a party so self-compassion starts with you, but ends in a party, because now God and others can come in. And just like you just said, now you can be with others. So it's a twofold. People can come in and you can be with people as well.
Well, and we've talked some about, I feel like we should go into just a little bit more depth on what compassion is. As we talk about what it isn't, it's not pity, it's not sympathy. Yeah. So you talk about compassion as having a substance to it. Mm-hmm. Can you just expound on that a little bit more?
Yeah. So when I walk people through this as an exercise, a lot of times people will kind of walk through some of the steps and then they'll kind of hit the compassion part of the exercise and they'll be like, oh, it doesn't work. And so one of my troubleshooting for people is, does your compassion have a substance to it? And people kind of look at you a little bit strangely because they're not sure what that substance is. But then if you put it into kind of a context of relationship, so if you were like going out to coffee with someone and they told you, I feel, I'm sorry that you're going through this. It's hard, I'm sad that you're hurting, but they say it robotically. They say it without feeling or emotion. They're just saying the words. They're going through, just what we do because that's what we're supposed to do. But if you're with another person that actually has compassion in what you're saying, you're going to feel a greater, I call it a substance, a greater feeling behind it. You're going to feel that they are really feeling your pain. They're not just feeling sorry for you. They're not just saying, oh, it's terrible that you're going through that. And one of the ways that you can connect with that substance is being able to think about somebody in your life that you really love, that you are really connected to, that you've experienced compassion for. And when I was first starting out this process of trying to give myself compassion, it was really rough because I'm a naturally compassionate person for other people, but trying to turn that same compassion towards myself was really difficult. So when I would be giving myself compassion, it would be very robotic. It would be like, I'm sorry you feel that way. And I would kind of like look at myself while I was saying it and be like, who's talking right now? Because in any other area of my life, I would never come up, to you, Brian, and say, I'm sorry you feel that way. But that's how I was, referring or trying to give that to myself. And so one of the big breakthroughs I had with self-compassion was picturing my daughter and her going through something she'd recently gone through, and how my heart was moved with compassion for her, that I felt deep feelings for her, that I wanted her to feel so loved. And I wanted her to know that I heard her and I saw her and I understood her and I wanted to be with her. So I took that feeling, which definitely feels like a substance, and I put it like a balm. I put it back towards my own heart. And the impact of that versus the robotic self-compassion I'd been giving myself before was incredibly different. And it showed me how powerful compassion can be if you actually have your heart connected to it, if you're actually feeling for that person. In the Bible, it talks about Jesus being moved with compassion. And they say that compassion is similar to a bowel movement, which I know sounds really gross and weird, but it's almost involuntary, that love comes up in your heart so strongly for someone else's pain that you can't help yourself from giving compassion. And so you see Jesus not being able to help himself, giving people compassion, being with people in their pain, as that compassion healed them physically, mentally, emotionally, and spiritually. And this is kind of my take on it. It's definitely not in the Bible. It's not illustrated in this way, but he would heal people and then he would tell people, don't go tell anyone. And I remember thinking, like, that's a terrible idea. Like, you can't heal people and then be like, don't tell anyone, it's not my time, because he was saying it wasn't his time to be revealed as the Son of God. But he kept doing it over and over again and kept telling them, don't tell people. But when I understand what compassion is, that it's almost involuntary, that he was so moved with compassion, he couldn't help himself from healing people. I actually believe that it was happening. I'm not saying that he didn't have any choice in the matter or anything like that. But I think his love for people was so great that he would release it and people would be healed, even though it wasn't his time yet.
As you were talking, I was thinking of a time with one of my daughters where they were acting really, really triggered. And, when the kids get those teenage years, it can be kind of, when they're having those temper tantrums or whatever, when they're 3, it's kind of cute. A little bit. It's not necessarily cute, but
you can smile a little bit more.
Yeah. But then when they're 16, it's kind of like, that's kind of rocky. But I remember she was having a really rough moment. And all of a sudden I saw past all of that and I saw just a little hurting girl that was really, and my heart just, like, all I wanted to do is just run and hug her and hold her. Yeah. And of course she didn't want that, but
of course, but your heart was positioned in that way.
Right. And yeah, compassion, I think another way for me, I look at it is seeing people beyond their behavior and seeing the pain, seeing what's really behind that is a hurting person. We'll get into what, some of the misconceptions about compassion. We'll get into that in a second, where we talk about, it's not condoning. It's not, justifying people's poor behavior. That's not what we're talking about at all. But we are talking about helping see people beyond their behavior and see that that's not their identity.
Yeah.
And that's,
And how you're going to approach someone's behavior as a parent or an employer or in any type of relationship is really going to be altered if you can see who they are. You're not going to be punishing, you're going to be training or disciplining. And that's a huge difference between you are your behavior, so I need to punish your behavior, to you are not your behavior, who you are is separate. And so I can help you with your behavior, but I'm helping you from a place that I see who you are.
yeah, that's a great point. I think a lot of what we call punishment, thinking more about parenting, because that's just on my brain right now, but a lot of what we call punishment is really just the parent blowing off steam. Like
Exactly.
they're
They're in a
upset.
triggered state. Yeah.
Yep. And we're going to blow off steam and we're just going to do something for the sake of doing it. It isn't a heart of, like you said, chastening, where our heart is to try, a heart of compassion to help them.
Yep.
So
Because compassion can actually, a lot of people think of compassion kind of like weak. Like when I talk to men sometimes about being compassionate, they're like, oh, that sounds more feminine. It sounds like, oh, it's okay. It's okay if you're having a hard time. That's a lot of times what people are thinking. But compassion can actually be very firm. Compassion can be strict. Compassion can say, I see who you are, and I'm going to hold the line for you by being very strict in this moment. Because I see you for who you are, I'm going to hold you to who you are. And that can actually come across very strong. So it's not a weak, passive emotion that we give to people. It's actually a strong, clear emotion that we're giving to people.
as you're saying that, what was coming to mind for me was Matthew chapter 23. So I would have that misconception about compassion as weakness a lot. And I think it just came from, it didn't seem tough. It didn't seem manly. But then I really look at the life of Jesus, and obviously as a guy growing up, like, Jesus is the ultimate man. So I look at what he did in Matthew 23 for 36 verses. He absolutely scorched the Pharisees and said a lot of the brood of vipers, whitewashed tombs, said they travel over the world to find a disciple, then make them twice the son of hell as they are. And I mean, he did
Mm-hmm.
not mince any words with them. He let them have
Yeah.
it. Then all of a sudden he stops that. And somewhere around verse 37, he gets very, very soft and says,
Mm-hmm.
but oh, how I would have gathered you like a hen gathers her chicks. And he's like weeping over them. And I'm like, yeah, when I get really mad or upset, that last part, verse 37-ish area, I don't do that. So
Yeah.
I'm more in the blowing off steam area and not in the I'm chastening. It's because I love you so much that I'm speaking firmly to you, because I want better for you. I want more for you. My heart breaks for you. That's, so I think, yeah, that's a great point about how compassion isn't weakness. Now, one of the things, back to accessing compassion for yourself, one of the things that was really helpful for me early on in working with you was something you call the child picture
Mm-hmm.
exercise. And I was really struggling with having compassion for myself, but then you gave me that homework very early on, and
Mm-hmm.
it was one of the most groundbreaking things that you helped me through.
Yeah.
And why don't you just explain a little bit about that project and how that can be such a powerful tool to help people connect with
Yeah.
self-compassion?
That when we are, younger, we haven't experienced as much shame. We still believe that we are who we are. But as time goes on, and parents, unfortunately, sometimes think that good is the ultimate standard for parenting, we go into shame and we go into the knowledge of good and evil, and we start to cover up. That's what I always think of shame as, is covering us up. And so when we become adults, it's very hard sometimes to give ourselves compassion because we're so covered up. So if compassion is being with who you're created to be, but you've experienced so much shame that it's covered you up so completely that we can't really see who you truly are, we can't be with you. And so if you go back to being a child, it's the truest form of who we are because we haven't been covered up.
Hmm.
And so when I go back and I look at that 5-year-old picture of myself, my ability to be able to give myself compassion increases because I can see who I really am, apart from all the things that have been done to me or I've done over the course of my life to get me to my present day adult self. And a big part of showing compassion is knowing a person. If there was you mentioned the whole kid thing, where if I just saw a child on the street and I didn't know who they are, I might have a universal compassion for them because they look sad or they were having a hard time. But the compassion I'm going to have for the stranger crying and the compassion I'm going to have for my child crying are going to be very different. And so if I'm looking at myself covered in shame and I don't know who I am, I'm not going to be able to give myself compassion. I'm going to be that stranger on the street that maybe I'm going to feel universally sorry for, compassionate for, but I don't know myself, so I can't be with myself. So when you go back and you find that picture of yourself when you're 5, and you start to see the characteristics that make up who you are, and when you start to know yourself, you'll love yourself. When you love yourself, you'll be able to give yourself compassion in a lot more powerful way.
Yeah. I mean, for me, I had to stare at that picture a long time before I could even connect that I was looking at myself.
Mm-hmm.
That was like, because at first it felt like this is a picture of somebody I used to be,
Yeah.
or maybe even somebody that's not me at all.
Mm-hmm. Yeah.
And
It's a very common. We've blocked out who we are to a certain degree because of pain we've experienced in our childhood.
right. But the longer I looked at it, the more I connected with, I saw it in my eyes. I could see, I'm like, I'm still him.
Yeah.
And that compassion really started to well up. And
I love that.
yeah, it was very, very powerful and definitely something that I would encourage people to experience for themselves. So
Mm-hmm.
anyway, so the other question I had is, what if a person did not experience compassion as a child, or you've talked a little bit about how compassion is like a language,
Mm-hmm.
and how, I didn't learn Spanish as a child, so I don't know Spanish, and it's going to be a lot harder for me to learn now, but I still can.
Yeah.
But just talk about a little bit, someone that was really, really devoid of compassion in their childhood, how this is obviously bringing up more pain, but kind of how they can work through that.
One of the people I worked through who happened to be a man, so that was kind of interesting with the whole, what we talked about, compassion being weakness. He was raised by a dad that definitely thought compassion was weakness or emotions were weakness. And so he didn't have a lot of compassion. So if he fell down and got hurt at a very young age, it would be get back up, don't be a loser, don't be weak, just keep, being, be strong, all those types of things. And so when we were working together as an adult, he had children himself now. And so I commonly help parents connect to themselves by connecting to their kids, because that's usually a thing that will move us more than ourselves. So if they're just like void of compassion for themselves, I'll usually say, well, what would you do if your son was doing this, your daughter was doing this? How would you feel for them? And all of a sudden they feel it, their eyes well up, they're feeling that emotion because they have this compassion and this love and this connection to their children. So I try to do the same thing with him. And he was like, I tell them to get back up and stop crying. And I was like, oh, and so, and having already known what his childhood was like, he was just replicating the model that he was shown to him. And he was just having his child do the same thing that he was called to do. So here we are, it's stuck kind of, because I'm like, I don't know how else to give you compassion. If you don't even have compassion for your children, how hard is it going to be to have compassion for yourself? And so what we ended up doing was connecting with people in his life that he's experienced compassion from as an adult, because in his childhood, he didn't experience any compassion. He wasn't raised with his mom, and his dad didn't have compassion to give. He didn't know that language. And so he never learned it. And one of the things I always share with people is you were created to be compassionate. You are like Jesus. You are like God. You're made in his image. And so you carry compassion within you. But the problem is, because it hasn't been activated and it's like dormant, we feel like we can't connect to that compassion. And so what I would do is I'd have them look for other adults in their life or other people in their life that they saw compassion in, and start to teach their younger self, 0 to 12 year old self, that coding, how to experience compassion. So for weeks, that was their only homework assignment. That for weeks, it was only find compassion in your life, bring it back to your childhood self. Rewrite those memories where you fell down and your dad said, get back up, and instead have a compassionate person come and stand in the gap for what your dad wasn't able to give you.
That's great. That's very similar to something you walked me through. And I remember one time where you had me picturing like images of when I was dealing with scared, the emotion scared, and picturing times when I was scared when I was little, and bringing like another adult in. But then I got to a point where I didn't want to bring anybody else in. I wanted to be with him. And I remember one time distinctly when there was a bad storm coming and I was sitting on the couch very scared. And I can remember the storm. I can remember this direction the storm was coming from. I can remember the color of the couch, all those things. I mean, very vividly, I remember them. And I remember just sitting on the couch being very scared. And then I just picture myself sitting there as an adult, sitting with the child version of me, and just, some of the compassion statements that we'll talk about in a little bit, and just kind of speaking compassion over myself in that way, and just how powerful that was.
Yeah.
And that's great. That's a great.
That means that you learn the language so you can now give it to yourself, and that is
I'm
ultimately
learning.
our goal.
I wouldn't say I've learned anything.
You have the basics.
I'm very much a work in progress. So. Talk a little bit about some other things that can block our ability to have self-compassion. We mentioned a little bit about shame, and shame's what ultimately is covering us up, but shame and blame, maybe just talk a little bit about that.
Yeah. So when I'm busy blaming somebody else for the pain inside of me, it keeps me from taking care of myself. And so I always say, when everyone's always like, well, yeah, I know blame's bad, I shouldn't be blaming other people. And I'm not so worried about shame being bad. I'm not worried necessarily, but I'm much more concerned that as you're busy blaming someone else, you leave yourself bleeding, neglected, in pain. And so that's a huge distraction from being able to give yourself compassion, is blame. And then, like we talked about, shame is when we're covered up, we can't be with ourselves. And that keeps us from being able to give compassion as well.
Well, as we're winding our time down, we talked a little bit about one big misconception of compassion being that it's weakness. One other one I just kind of alluded to, but it was a huge struggle for me, and still is. And I'm assuming if it's a struggle for me, it's probably a struggle for others as well. But is this concept of having compassion is like condoning what you're doing.
Enabling, condoning.
Yeah. Talk a little bit about that.
Yeah, I mean, that's really common. Again, I know we've referenced parenting a lot in this podcast, but it's, we feel like if we don't punish and we don't discipline and we give love before we give discipline, then the child's going to think, oh, it's okay that I behave this way because I just got rewarded with love. So we withhold love because we don't want to give the impression that we're enabling it, we're condoning it. And that seems like a good plan because, you want to reward good behavior and you don't want to reward bad behavior. But the problem with that is the reason why we're having bad behavior in the first place is because nobody's with us in our pain. Bad behavior is a knee-jerk reaction to pain. It's an emotional allergic reaction to the pain I have inside my heart that I desperately need someone to see and hear me in and be with me in. And so if we actually want long-term behavior change, compassion first, logic second. And if you think about it on a neurological level, if I'm in an emotional state where I'm having bad behavior and I'm not listening and I'm having big emotions, and you try to logically come talk to me about what I'm doing and try to discipline me, you can take my whole world away. And we probably have all experienced this before. You're grounded. I'm taking away your video games. I'm taking away everything that you love to get you to stop having bad behavior and for you to know that I'm not enabling or condoning your bad behavior. But the whole thing about it, when on a neurological level, when you're in an emotional state, is you literally cannot hear logic when you're in your right brain, when you're in your emotions. So if, as parents, we want to be effective in training and teaching our kids, we would want to first connect to them emotionally, which means being with them in their mistakes and being with them in their bad behavior. And like you said, with your daughter, being able to see her for who she really is, apart from her behavior. So if I'm able to take care of myself, to be with my child in that way, now I'm with her or him. And now from that place, I can bring logic in because I've actually comforted the right side of that child's brain. So now their left side of their brain can engage. And now I can teach them why what they did was not appropriate, and teach them how to respond differently and logically explain to them why their behavior was not okay and why I'm not condoning their behavior, but I'm 100% being with them in their behavior.
And what also has helped me, especially on the logical side of this, is it helped me to look at it scripturally, just kind of how God relates to us. So one of the things it says, the Bible says, is that while we were still sinners, Jesus died for us. He didn't wait for us to get our crap together before he was willing to come here and sacrifice his life for us. And the other great example that I see is, Adam and Eve in the garden. So we've talked about that before. We've talked about the knowledge of good and evil and just all the things that went awry there. And when he came to them, he didn't immediately tell them they had to leave the garden. He didn't immediately tell them that work's now going to be hard. And because there were definitely consequences.
There was definitely
consequences. Huge consequences to what they did. But instead, he was so concerned about who told you this, what happened. His heart was for them. And then he killed the animals and covered them with skins, and he took care of them, and he nurtured them, and he took care of them. And then the consequences came.
Yeah, exactly.
Whereas as a parent, I typically would go right to, get out of this garden. You're out of here.
Exactly.
It's going to be hard now. Life's going to be hard. You had it so good.
Exactly. Yeah. And that is definitely how we approach it. And really, it's a backwards way of doing it, because if we don't have people's hearts, if we're not connected to people's hearts, behavior will never change.
Yeah.
Or it will short term, but it won't be sustainable.
Right. Yeah. No, that's really good stuff. I think we could talk about compassion for, probably the rest of our lives, but,
I love compassion,
but we want to wrap this up. So I want to conclude, and I thought it'd be good to conclude with you reciting this list of compassion statements that you have created to help people. And before you share it, just sharing a little bit of my personal experience with it. Again, I came at this angle as this being kind of weak. So these statements were a little bit, maybe at first, when I first was looking at this, maybe they were a little tacky or a little, I don't know what the right word is, maybe mushy.
Cheesy,
soft,
mushy, yeah.
Cheesy,
yeah, exactly.
Cheesy is a better word than tacky.
Yeah.
However, what I started to do is when I was in a place of pain, and especially, obviously, when I came to you the first time, I was very primed for this type of exposure. But I would just stare at this list of words that you're about to read, these phrases. I would stare at them until one of them jumped off the page and spoke to me.
Yeah.
And it was literally, it was like compassion reaching up from my phone or the piece of paper I had it written down on and just grabbing a hold of my heart.
Yeah.
And that's what these phrases were doing. It was like giving me an IV of compassion, So
yeah. And it's kind of similar. This is another way, the childhood picture, like you talked about, of being able to give yourself compassion. But this is also another way. I'm not a big fan of just repetitively doing things without any heart connection. But if you're able to repetitively do this with heart connection, it'll become more normal. It'll become more common. You'll catch yourself thinking some of these thoughts without even realizing it, because you've put so much attention on focusing on what compassion is, that it's going to be able to be part of your subconscious, which will come up when you need it the most. So with your heart connected, if you focus on this list repetitively, it will start helping you speak the language of compassion.
Very good.
And then also, I want to say one more thing about the list of compassion. I compiled this list based on what people would experience when a person of compassion would come and sit with them. These are the most common phrases that people would hear from a compassionate grandparent or compassionate teacher or compassionate person coming in and being with them in those moments. So I thought it was really interesting how it was repetitive when people experience compassion. So yes, it's my list, but it's the list that came from the experiences that other people experienced when they were able to receive compassion.
Well, why don't you go ahead and read them?
Yeah. So why not, as you're listening, why doesn't everybody just take a moment and just connect with your heart? You may not be feeling big emotions right now, but maybe think about the last time that you felt sadness, that you felt scared, that you felt lonely. And then I know it kind of seems potentially cheesy, but put your hand on your heart. It just helps us center onto that sadness. So picture your heart feeling sad, feeling scared, feeling lonely. And I'm going to go ahead and read these. And like Brian said, Pick the one or two that stand out to you. So I see you trying so hard. I'm proud of you. I'm sorry you feel sad, alone, scared. I can tell you care so much. Take all the time you need. I'll sit with you until you feel comforted. I accept you. I see you. I'm sorry you feel trapped. I think you're brave. I don't want to get rid of you. I don't see you as broken. It's going to be okay. And I enjoy you.
A little different spin on the one where you said, I will sit with you until you feel comforted.
Mm-hmm.
The one that I really gravitated to was, I will sit with you until you feel safe.
Yeah. Yeah.
So
So usually
really
if you
spoke to
have
me.
maybe a common feeling of scared, you really need that feeling of safety.
Mm-hmm. Yeah.
If we're more commonly sad, we need that comfort. If we feel alone, we need someone to sit with us, to be with us in that moment. But yeah, definitely, there's a lot of feelings of unsafety that we can bring compassion to, that even if our external worlds are still feeling unsafe, we can internally feel safe.
We covered a lot of ground today, Laura.
Yeah. Yeah.
So
one of my favorite subjects.
absolutely. Yeah. Like I said, it is the X factor of everything to do with emotional health is the ability to experience compassion, and starting with that compassion focused on yourself.
Yeah, exactly.
Very good. Well, thank you for your time today, Laura, and thank you everyone for joining us. So until next time, for our next episode of Triggered and True, thank you again.